Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, completely unresolved paradoxes in a history of 20th century leadership. We are looking at a man caught squarely between his own brilliant democratic doctrine and his starkly authoritarian actions. I'm talking about José Félix Estigarribia. He's the general who won the Chaco War, which was literally the most brutal South American conflict of the century. But here's the kicker, and why his story is absolutely essential for us to understand today. Just a year after winning that war, he warned that the real danger to his nation wasn't a foreign army at all. It was the totalitarian ideology that turns a democracy into a war machine. Yet when he finally got absolute power himself, he faced a massive, undeniable contradiction. We are not here to do some patriotic tribute today. We are here to rigorously analyze that tension. But to really understand the man's philosophy, we've got to start at the exact moment the guns stopped. Picture this. It's June 14th, 1935. It is exactly noon. Down in the brutal, heat-scorched thorns of the Chaco Boreal, the victorious commander-in-chief sits down at a typewriter. He doesn't bang out some triumphant, chest-thumping victory cry. No. He writes 5 short paragraphs, just about 200 words. And he simply says, "God willing, they will always be inspired by your example." He tells his troops his greatest honor was simply being their commander, and that he's going home. This is Circular 105. It's a sober, incredibly battle-weary farewell from a guy who has just seen way too much. And what he saw, well, it boils down to this staggering number right here. 36,000. That is how many Paraguayans died over 3 relentless years of fighting in the Chaco. Estigarribia buried his own army. He knew the absolute, grim empirical cost of conflict. So when he steps up to a diplomatic podium a year later to talk about peace, you have to understand, he is not speaking as some naive idealist or a sheltered academic. He is speaking directly from the blood-soaked ground of empirical reality. Which brings us to Section 1, the 1936 diagnosis, observing a world on the brink. So he gets back from the battlefield, looks out at the rest of the world, and sees something terrifying. The global order is completely unraveling. Just look at this timeline. In February 1936, Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland, and the League of Nations does, well, practically nothing. In July, the Spanish Civil War erupts, and it basically becomes a live testing ground for European fascism. By October, the Rome-Berlin Axis is formally signed. The liberal international order built after World War I is collapsing in real time, and all those treaties meant to guarantee peace, they're proving to be just worthless paper. From his vantage point in South America, Estigarribia sees this not just as a distant political crisis, but as a highly contagious strategic threat actively looking for a foothold in the Americas. Let's move to Doctrine 1, intrinsic versus transactional peace. This first core concept is brilliant because it takes the cold logic of the battlefield and applies it directly to international relations. Estigarribia argues that diplomacy keeps confusing 2 completely different types of peace. On one hand, you have transactional peace. This is purely contractual. It's built on diplomatic calculations, negotiations, and treaties. And it only survives when there's no pressure. The second a real test of strength comes along, it completely collapses. On the other hand, you have intrinsic peace. This one is organic. It grows from a people's deeply held internal values. A society that genuinely wants stability for its own national project doesn't need external policing. Think of it like this. A soldier fighting for his own convictions will hold the line, but one fighting just out of obedience will eventually surrender. Intrinsic peace actually withstands the pressure. To see this in action, look no further than the 1938 Munich Agreement. This is the ultimate transactional failure. You've got Neville Chamberlain coming back, waving a piece of paper declaring peace for our time, but it was just a lifeless formula, exactly the kind of contractual illusion Estigarribia was warning about back in 1936. And less than a year later, Hitler's tanks rolled right across the border. A peace without conviction is nothing but a fragile technical truce. Now for Doctrine 2, the apocalyptic campaign. This is where his diagnosis of global militarism gets much darker. Estigarribia saw that Western civilization, which was supposed to be this grand engine for human elevation, was being completely subverted. He mapped out exactly how totalitarian states were twisting the logic of civilization. Instead of using the state to create welfare for its people, nations like Germany were taking their entire civilizational apparatus, their schools, their factories, their culture, and turning it into one monstrous army. Literally a massive factory designed solely to produce war. He called this out loud in 1936, while a lot of people in the West were still totally refusing to name it. Which leads us to Doctrine 3, the armor of respect.
Now, at a time when authoritarian strongmen were getting visible results and a lot of intellectuals were openly admiring Mussolini or Hitler, Estigarribia went in the exact opposite direction. And listen closely here, because the armor of respect isn't just some poetic imagery. It is a cold, hard military and strategic doctrine of hemispheric defense. He shifted democracy from being a nice moral preference to an absolute structural necessity for survival. His logic went like this. Cohesive democracies are structurally less attractive targets for expansionist powers. Defeating a true democracy doesn't give you the same easy wins as knocking over a hollow authoritarian regime. A cohesive democratic nation acts as a structural shield. It resists ideological infiltration because its citizens actually believe in their system and genuinely want to defend it.
He stated it incredibly plainly. If we suppress the empire of liberty, we will have suppressed the best armor of respect that covers it. He firmly believed that if you strip away that democratic conviction, all you have left are hollow institutions. And hollow institutions are incredibly easy to excavate and destroy from the inside by those exact totalitarian forces he warned about. To him, democracy wasn't just a political system, it was the ultimate national defense. Next section, the 1940 pivot, the unresolved contradiction. So, up to this point, we've been tracking the perfect arc of a visionary statesman, right? But history is rarely that clean. And this is where we hit a massive, sharp narrative pivot. Let's just look at the facts plainly, no sugarcoating. In August 1939, José Félix Estigarribia is elected president of Paraguay. The very man who preached the absolute structural necessity of democracy inherits a fractured, exhausted country, totally surrounded by authoritarian neighbors. Just 6 months later, in February 1940, the reversal is absolute. He dissolves the parliament, he completely suspends the constitution, he assumes absolute dictatorial powers. 5 months after that, he enacts a new, highly authoritarian constitution that centralizes executive power. And then, in September 1940, he dies in a plane crash at the age of 57. The brilliant architect of the democratic armor personally dismantled it. This brings us to Section 6, 3 possible verdicts. So, how exactly does the man who brilliantly diagnosed the trap become the very one who falls right into it? Well, we are not going to neatly solve this for you today. Instead, let's look at the 3 ways history tends to judge this exact paradox. Verdict 1, doctrinal betrayal. This argument says that the raw pressure of actual power simply defeated the strategic thinker. He abandoned his ideals and actively stripped away the very democratic shield he told everyone they needed. Verdict 2, emergency exception. This perspective argues that his hand was forced. He was governing during the outbreak of World War II, surrounded by hostile, highly efficient authoritarian neighbors. Grabbing power was a temporary, desperate necessity just to preserve the nation's sovereignty. And then there's verdict 3, the irresolvable contradiction. Maybe both things are true. He saw the problem with absolute surgical clarity, but found himself governing under the exact fragile, impossible conditions he had identified as the most dangerous. Which brings us to the end of our analysis. The man who brilliantly defined the mechanics of peace and the strict strategic value of democracy ended his life as a dictator. It's a massive glaring tension, and it remains completely open. So I'm leaving this entirely up to you. Look at the data. Weigh the philosophical doctrine against his actual historical actions. Which of those 3 readings actually makes the most sense to you? What is your verdict? Think critically about it, because honestly, how you answer that question reveals just as much about how we view power today as it does about the past. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.